I'll never forget the scene I witnessed on February 14, 2023. While packing the last boxes from the office I shared with my ex-wife of 12 years, I accidentally opened the back door of the house I'd painstakingly built and saw Jessica, my ex-wife of 38 years, raising a $300 champagne glass I'd bought for our anniversary, toasting with Karen, my 62-year-old ex-mother-in-law. To the most lucrative divorce in family history, Karen said with a laugh. Jessica added, in 90 days, all the businesses will be ours, along with the vacation home and that stupid collection of vintage cars he loves so much. Our 8-year plan has finally come to fruition. What they didn't know was that my phone was recording the entire thing while I sat motionless, my stomach churning. In that moment, I understood that my entire marriage had been an elaborate financial trap. But what happened 3 weeks later in court left everyone speechless when my lawyer stood up and said the words that changed everything. Is it ever worth trusting someone again after such a betrayal? I never imagined my 12-year marriage would end with a celebration of my failure. My name is Michael Johnson, I'm 42, a tech entrepreneur in Seattle, and I believed I'd built a perfect life with Jessica, a woman I met in college and with whom I've shared dreams, failures, and triumphs for over a decade. Our relationship began like a fairy tale. We were young, ambitious, and in love. We married in 2011, when my career was still in its infancy and I was struggling to establish my cybersecurity company. Jessica always seemed supportive of my dreams, even when we had to save every penny and live in a small one-bedroom apartment in a not-so-great part of town. Or so I thought. What I didn't know was that behind that welcoming smile and encouraging words lurked a meticulous plan that had unfolded over the years under the careful orchestration of my mother-in-law, Karen Wilson, a woman who always treated me with a distant cordiality and who, as I later discovered, considered her daughter deserving of far more than I could offer. I still remember that first family dinner, when Karen asked about my financial plans with an interest I interpreted as genuine, but which I now understand was the first step in a long investigation into my economic potential. I met Jessica in 2009 during a technology conference at the University of Washington. I had just finished my master's degree in computer science and was presenting a project on new cryptography methodologies. Jessica was there representing the company where she worked in public relations, although I later learned that her main interest was identifying young talent with financial potential. She approached me after my presentation, complimented my work in a way that seemed genuinely interested, and invited me for coffee. That day, we talked for hours. Jessica was intelligent, charming, and seemed to understand my ambitions perfectly. When she mentioned that she'd always dreamed of marrying someone who built something important, I interpreted it as admiration, not a calculated plan. Our courtship was intense and relatively short. 6 months later, we were living together in my small apartment, and a year after our first date, I proposed. I remember saving for 3 months to buy a modest but meaningful engagement ring, a 0.5-carat diamond solitaire that cost $2,800, practically all my savings at the time. When I slipped it on Jessica's finger, I saw a brief flicker of disappointment in her eyes that quickly turned into a smile. At the time, I thought it was nerves. Today, I know she expected more, much more. I met Karen 2 weeks later, when I took Jessica for a weekend in Portland, where her mother lived in an elegant house in Lake Oswego. From the first moment, I felt like I was being evaluated. Karen asked specific questions about my background, my family, which was middle class and without important connections, something that clearly disappointed her, and especially about my career plans. When I mentioned that I was starting a cybersecurity company, I saw the same gleam in Karen's eye that I occasionally caught in Jessica's. Again, I interpreted it as enthusiasm for my ambitions, not as the recognition of an opportunity. Our wedding was in July 2011, a simple ceremony in a Seattle park with about 80 guests. Jessica seemed disappointed with the event, even though I had spent all the money I had earned from my early consulting contracts. Karen was visibly irritated when she realized the buffet didn't include premium champagne and that the flowers weren't the most expensive available. In her toast, she made a peculiar remark that I only now fully understand, to Jessica, who always knew what she wanted in life and found exactly what she was looking for. The guests interpreted it as a compliment to our union, I now understand it was a reference to the plan. The early years of our marriage were a time of struggle and hard work. I founded CyberShield Solutions in our one-bedroom apartment, working 16-hour days as I tried to secure clients and develop our first security products. Jessica worked in public relations at a marketing firm, though she frequently complained about her salary and work environment. She repeatedly emphasized how she had sacrificed better opportunities to support my dream, something I accepted with both gratitude and guilt. This created a pattern early on. I felt eternally indebted to her, which made me more susceptible to her future manipulations. In 2013, we had our first major breakthrough when CyberShield secured a $350,000 contract with a regional healthcare company to develop a security system for their patient data. I remember returning home elated, with a bottle of champagne that cost $120, an absurd luxury for our budget at the time. Jessica was genuinely excited, but her first question was, "Does this mean we can finally buy a proper house?" That night, instead of celebrating, we spent hours looking at real estate listings in expensive neighborhoods that were clearly beyond our means. As the company grew, so did our lives. In 2015, we secured our first major contract with a Fortune 500 company, a $1.2 million deal to provide ongoing security for their cloud infrastructure. We were finally able to buy a house, a spacious place in the suburbs with a garden and room for the children we planned to have. During the purchase process, Jessica suggested we put the house in her name for business security reasons, arguing that my name would be protected should the company face legal trouble. I briefly consulted a lawyer who suggested a joint ownership structure, but Jessica insisted, saying she trusted her as I did her and that it was the wisest decision. I thought it was reasonable at the time. I trusted her completely. That was my first mistake, and it wouldn't be my last. The house cost $975,000, a significant sum, but Jessica insisted we needed something in a prestigious neighborhood to reflect the company's growing status. We spent another $150,000 on renovations and furnishings, far beyond what I thought was prudent, but Jessica argued that we needed to impress clients and business associates we would eventually welcome into our home. Once again, I relented, wanting to see her happy and believing I was investing in our joint future. It was during this period that I began to notice small inconsistencies in Jessica's behavior. She talked constantly about having children, decorating a room as a future nursery, but always finding reasons to put it off. First she wanted to establish her own consulting career, which never really took off, then she decided the house needed more renovations to be kid-friendly, and later she insisted we needed an even more stable financial situation. When I questioned her, she would become defensive or start crying, accusing me of not understanding the pressure she felt as a woman. I would back away, feeling guilty for pressuring her. In the years that followed, CyberShield grew exponentially. I went from a small entrepreneur to CEO of a multi-million-dollar company. In 2017, our annual revenue reached $6.8 million, and in 2018, we reached $15 million with a team of 47 employees. Success brought material comforts we had never experienced before. We purchased a second home in 2018, a vacation property in Lake Tahoe that cost $2.3 million. Again, Jessica insisted that the house be put in her name, this time arguing it was to diversify our assets in case of problems with the company. By this point, I was so busy managing CyberShield's explosive growth that I simply agreed, wanting to avoid conflict. It was during this period that I began my classic car collection, a passion I'd cultivated since my teens. My first acquisition was a 1963 split-window Corvette in near-original condition that cost $175,000. Jessica initially scoffed at the hobby, calling it expensive boys' toys, but when she realized the potential investment value, she changed her approach. She began accompanying me to auctions and shows, always suggesting specific models that would surely appreciate in value in the future. In retrospect, she was meticulously cataloging my holdings. Karen began appearing more frequently in our lives around 2019. She had moved to Seattle after her third divorce, claiming to want to be closer to her daughter. What I didn't know at the time was that she had received a substantial divorce settlement from her last husband, a pharmaceutical executive, and was looking for new, investment opportunities. Her last husband had filed a lawsuit against her for financial fraud, but the case was settled out of court with a confidentiality agreement. This information only came to light much later. Karen began showing up more frequently at our house, always with suggestions for investments I should make or properties I should acquire. She became a constant presence in our lives, offering opinions on everything from the management of the company to my wardrobe. Jessica, who had once occasionally complained about her mother's interference, now consulted her on virtually every decision. The two of them would spend hours holed up in Jessica's office in our home, conversations that ended abruptly when I entered the room. I clearly remember one Sunday in 2020 when Karen arrived with brochures for an $8.5 million beachfront mansion in Malibu. "You've already reached this level, Michael. You need a home that shows it to the world," she argued. When I explained that I preferred to reinvest in a company at that moment, especially with the economic uncertainty caused by the emerging pandemic, the two exchanged disapproving looks that I attributed at the time to simple disappointment, but which I now understand to have been irritation at my resistance to their plan. The COVID-19 pandemic brought significant changes to our relationship. With social distancing, we spent more time together at home than ever before, and the flaws in our marriage became harder to ignore. Jessica seemed constantly bored and irritated by my presence, even when I tried to involve her in joint projects or activities. At the same time, demand for cybersecurity solutions skyrocketed with the global transition to remote work, and CyberShield was busier than ever, which kept me working long hours even while physically at home. It was during the pandemic that I began to notice truly concerning behavior. Jessica installed digital locks in her home office, claiming she needed privacy for video calls. I often caught her speaking quietly on the phone, conversations that ended abruptly when I approached. On a few occasions, I found company documents in her office, including confidential financial information that I hadn't shared with her. When I questioned her, she said she was simply trying to better understand the business so she could properly support me. In mid-2021, Jessica announced her interest in interior design, something she'd never previously mentioned as an interest. She invested over $200,000 completely renovating our main house and vacation home, hiring professional photographers to document the process, and creating a sleek website for her new studio. However, from what I could gather, she never really sought outside clients, and the only projects in her portfolio were our own properties. Still, she insisted she needed a substantial monthly budget for marketing and networking, which came directly from our joint accounts. Holiday parties were always held at Karen's house, a family tradition I respected even though I wasn't entirely comfortable. On Christmas Day 2021, I noticed something strange. While helping carry some boxes into my mother-in-law's basement, I found a folder with documents about my business, including financial assessments I'd never shared with Jessica or her family. There were also documents about Washington state divorce laws, with sections on property division and businesses highlighted in yellow. Flipping through them quickly, I saw notes in the margins about strategies to maximize profits and techniques for hiding assets. I froze, unable to believe what I saw. I casually mentioned the matter to Jessica on the way home, and she quickly explained that her mother was helping a friend through a difficult divorce and had researched the topic extensively. The explanation sounded plausible, and part of me desperately wanted to believe her. So I did, because I wanted to believe. Another mistake. 2022 began with major changes for CyberShield. We secured a $12 million contract with a multinational energy company to protect its critical infrastructure, the largest in the company's history. Our team had grown to 112 employees, and we were considering opening a second office on the East Coast. The company's estimated market value exceeded $100 million, something I never imagined when I started in our small apartment with a single laptop and a ton of ideas. Jessica suggested we celebrate with a 3-week trip to Europe, visiting luxury destinations in Italy, France, and Greece. The trip cost nearly $75,000, including suites in 5-star hotels, exclusive dining experiences, and shopping in luxury boutiques. During this trip, she was strangely obsessed with her cell phone, constantly answering messages and making private calls. When I asked, she said she was working on a surprise for me. The surprise actually came 2 months after we returned, when I came home early from a business trip to find divorce papers on our dining room table. That September night, Jessica coldly explained to me that she was no longer happy in her marriage, that we had grown in different directions, and that she wanted to find her own way. I was devastated, begging her to consider couples therapy or any solution that might save our relationship. She remained adamant, saying her decision was final and that her lawyer would contact mine to work out the details. That's when she mentioned that since she had sacrificed her career to support me, she deserved half of everything, including the company I'd built practically single-handedly. I spent the night in a nearby hotel, in shock, mentally replaying every moment of our marriage, trying to understand where it all went wrong. I called my closest friend, David Thompson, who had known me since college. David immediately suspected something was wrong, more than just two people drifting apart. "Mike, this seems planned. The timing is so strange, right after you've achieved this level of success," he said. The following months were a blur of meetings with lawyers, sleepless nights, and a constant feeling of betrayal that gnawed at my soul. Jessica hired one of the most aggressive divorce lawyers in town, Timothy Roberts, someone known for squeezing every last penny out of cases like ours. The demands were absurd: the main house, the vacation home, my car collection, which now included 7 historic vehicles valued at over $1.5 million, 60% of my company's stock, and a monthly pension equivalent to 35% of my future earnings. When my lawyer, Frank Williams, showed me the list, I could barely breathe. Jessica's legal team's argument was that she had been instrumental in CyberShield's success, serving as an unofficial consultant and making significant personal sacrifices to support my career. They argued that she had postponed having children and her own professional ambitions so that I could build the empire we now had. Most alarmingly, they had documentation that seemed to support these claims: emails thanking her for her guidance, photos of her at company events, and even a birthday card where I had written that none of this would be possible without you. In January 2023, Jessica moved into a luxury downtown apartment that, I later discovered, had been purchased 6 months before the divorce filing, in a financial arrangement involving her mother. Karen began showing up at every divorce-related meeting, sitting next to Jessica like a watchful guardian, always whispering advice in her ear and casting triumphant glances my way. At one of these meetings, I accidentally overheard Karen tell Jessica that, "Soon he'll have nothing, and you'll have everything you deserve." It was devastating to discover that our main joint account, where we held our operating reserves, had been virtually emptied. From a balance of nearly $750,000, only $32,000 remained. Jessica had gradually transferred the money over the past 8 months to personal accounts, claiming they were for decorating projects and investments for our future. When legally confronted about this, she simply stated that, as joint account holder, she had every right to use the funds as she saw fit. My health began to deteriorate rapidly. I lost 15 kilos in 2 months, developed chronic insomnia, and my blood pressure reached alarming levels. I began having panic attacks in the middle of important meetings, something I had never experienced before. My doctor prescribed anti-anxiety medication and suggested I take a leave of absence from the company, but I knew I couldn't walk away, not with so much at stake. David practically moved in with me, worried I might do something stupid. He was the one who found me one night, sitting on the bathroom floor with a bottle of pills in my hand, contemplating the unthinkable. I never opened the bottle, but the fact that I had considered that option scared me deeply. It was David who convinced me to find a new lawyer when it became clear that Frank Williams was being easily manipulated by Jessica's aggressive team. "Frank is a good lawyer for normal divorces," David explained, "but this isn't a normal divorce. This is a predatory operation, and you need someone who understands that." Andrew Peters joined the case in early February 2023. A middle-aged attorney with a reputation for ruthlessness and unwavering ethics, Andrew had specific experience in high-value divorce cases involving financial fraud. Our first meeting lasted 4 hours, during which he meticulously reviewed every aspect of the case, asking questions no one had asked before. Unlike Frank, Andrew was undeterred by Jessica's aggressive tactics. At the first meeting, he asked me a question that changed everything. Have you ever considered that this might not just be a divorce, but a premeditated conspiracy to seize your assets? The question shocked me, but it opened my eyes to possibilities I had previously refused to see. Andrew suggested hiring a private investigator to look into Jessica's financial activities over the past few years, as well as a computer forensics expert to examine our electronic communications. I was initially reluctant, feeling it would be an invasion of privacy, but I eventually agreed, desperate to understand what was really going on. While Andrew's hired experts did their work, I continued participating in the divorce negotiations, following Andrew's advice to appear cooperative while buying time. Jessica and her team interpreted my apparent passivity as resignation or defeat, which made them more confident and, consequently, more careless. In one of these meetings, Jessica's lawyer let slip that they were particularly interested in some specific Cyber Shield contracts involving proprietary technology one had personally developed. This seemingly innocent comment raised a red flag in Andrew, who began investigating whether industrial espionage attempts were underway. February 14, 2023, was when everything changed. Valentine's Day, ironically. I had arranged with Jessica to go to our old house to retrieve the last items from the office we kept there. I arrived earlier than planned and used my key, which I hadn't yet returned. The house seemed empty, but I heard voices coming from the back deck. Instinctively, I grabbed my phone and started recording, silently approaching the glass door that led to the outdoor area. What I saw and heard in those 3 minutes and 27 seconds of recording shattered any remaining doubts I might have harbored. Jessica and Karen were sitting comfortably, sipping the 2004 Krug Claus du Mesnil champagne I'd bought for $1,200 for our wedding anniversary, toasting the success of their plan. I heard Karen say, "To the most profitable divorce in family history," while laughing almost maniacally. Jessica added, "In 90 days, all the businesses will be ours, along with the vacation home and that stupid collection of vintage cars he loves so much. Our 8-year plan has finally come to fruition." Karen then asked if I'd suspected anything, to which Jessica replied that I was pathetically trusting, and that I never questioned her when she suggested putting various assets in her name or opening joint accounts that she managed alone. They both laughed when Jessica mentioned how easy it was to convince me to invest in projects that were actually disguised transfers into accounts controlled only by her. The final blow came when Karen said, "It's a good thing you never wanted kids with him. Kids would complicate everything." Jessica replied, "I never wanted kids with him, Mom. That was always a lie to keep him hopeful and engaged." I remained paralyzed, feeling a toxic mix of shock, anger, and nausea. I continued recording as they detailed other aspects of their plan, including how they intended to use confidential company information to pressure me into a more favorable deal for them. Jessica specifically mentioned a deal with the federal government we were about to sign, saying that information alone is worth millions in the right market. Karen suggested the names of competitors who might be interested in this information, something that chilled my blood, as it constituted not only personal betrayal but also potential corporate espionage and national treason, given the sensitivity of some of our government contracts. Most disturbing was hearing Jessica describe how she had planned our initial meeting at that college conference. "I had a list of potential targets," she said between sips of champagne, "promising young people with good ideas but no connections or family protection. Michael was perfect, smart enough to succeed, naive enough to be manipulated, and completely alone in the world." Karen applauded her daughter's long-term vision, mentioning that this would be the biggest con yet, implying that it wasn't the first time they had pulled something similar. I quietly left, got in my car, and drove aimlessly for hours, listening to the recording over and over, each word sinking deeper into my chest like a knife. When I finally pulled into an empty parking lot, I called Andrew and sent him the recording. His reaction was immediate. "Don't come home," he instructed. Go to a hotel she doesn't know and don't tell anyone where you are. This changes everything. Andrew reacted immediately. We met in his office at 10 p.m., and he had already transcribed the entire conversation and begun developing a new strategy. It was there that he revealed to me what the private investigator had discovered. Over the past 6 years, Jessica had diverted approximately $2.3 million from our joint accounts to secret accounts in her name and her mother's. There was also evidence that she had attempted to access CyberShield's proprietary information and sent emails to competitors, possibly scouting opportunities that would arise when she took control of part of the company after the divorce. Even more alarming were the discoveries about Karen's past. It wasn't just the 3 divorces I knew about, there was also a fraud lawsuit that had been settled out of court in Oregon, and an SEC investigation into insider trading that was dismissed for lack of conclusive evidence. The pattern was clear. Karen had a history of manipulating relationships and financial systems for her own personal gain, and she had apparently taught these skills to her daughter. The following days were a roller coaster of emotions and frenetic activity. Andrew assembled a team that included financial investigators, cybersecurity experts, and even a psychologist specializing in emotional and financial abuse cases. We discovered that Karen had been divorced 3 times, each time leaving with substantial sums of money. Her second husband had tried to sue Karen for fraud but ultimately withdrew after threats that she would reveal embarrassing information about his personal life. It seemed she had taught her daughter her part, and I was just the latest in a line of used and discarded men. The computer forensics expert recovered deleted emails from the computer Jessica occasionally used in our home office. In an email to Karen dated 2015, shortly after we purchased our first home, Jessica wrote, "Phase 1 complete. The house is in my name." He didn't even blink when I suggested it. In another, from 2018, she detailed how she had gotten me to put the Lake Tahoe house in her name as well. "He's so busy with his business that he'll sign anything I put in front of him. We're going to proceed with Phase 3 sooner than planned." Most disturbing was a detailed document titled Extraction Plan that Jessica had created in 2020, detailing how and when she would file for divorce, what assets she would seek, and how she would use company information as leverage. The document included a specific timeline tied to CyberShield's financial milestones, with the ideal exit point identified as when the valuation reaches $100 million or more. The divorce had been filed just 2 weeks after an independent appraiser estimated CyberShield's value at $115 million as part of a potential investment round. Meanwhile, I kept up appearances during the official divorce negotiations. Jessica and her lawyer continued to push for a settlement that would essentially leave me bankrupt, while Andrew asked for more time to review documents. What Jessica didn't know was that we were building not only a defense case in the divorce, but a potentially criminal case against her and Karen. Andrew coordinated with CyberShield's security department to document all attempts to access our systems made by Jessica or using her credentials. We discovered that she had attempted to access files related to sensitive government contracts multiple times and had copied intellectual property information to external devices. Based on this evidence, we filed emergency protective measures to protect the company while the divorce proceedings continued. I also discreetly contacted key clients and investors to alert them to the situation, presenting it as a corporate security issue without going into personal details. This was crucial to maintaining market confidence in the company during this turbulent period. I had to carefully balance the need for transparency with protecting CyberShield's reputation, which could be damaged by association if the sordid details were publicly revealed. On March 7, 2023, we had our preliminary hearing in court. Jessica arrived wearing a Chanel ensemble I'd given her for Christmas, accompanied by Karen and her attorney, all exuding confidence. I sat quietly next to Andrew, who seemed unusually relaxed. The judge, a middle-aged woman named Diane Reynolds, reviewed the opening documents and asked if there were any preliminary matters to discuss before we proceeded. That's when Andrew stood up and said the words that changed everything. "Your Honor, before we proceed, I would like to present evidence that this divorce proceeding is, in fact, part of a premeditated conspiracy of financial and emotional fraud, orchestrated by Ms. Johnson and her mother, Ms. Wilson, with the specific purpose of illegally misappropriating Mr. Johnson's assets and intellectual property. We have evidence of embezzlement, fraudulent transfers, attempts at industrial espionage, and, most importantly, a forensically recorded confession in which both parties admit that the marriage and subsequent divorce were planned from the beginning as a scheme for illicit financial gain. The silence that followed was absolute. I looked at Jessica and saw her face drain of color. Karen gripped her daughter's arms so tightly her knuckles turned white. Their lawyer began to object furiously, but Judge Reynolds, visibly puzzled, asked to see the evidence Andrew had mentioned. Over the next hour, Andrew methodically presented the evidence we had collected: bank statements showing suspicious transfers, recovered compromising emails, Jessica's extraction plan, the private investigator's assessment, and finally, the recording of that fateful Valentine's Day. As Jessica's voice echoed through the courtroom, clearly stating how she had manipulated me for years, I saw tears in the eyes of one of the court assistants. Judge Reynolds remained professionally impassive, but her eyes betrayed her indignation. Jessica's attorney tried to argue that the recording had been obtained illegally, but Andrew was prepared. He presented documents showing that I was still legally co-owner of the residence at the time of the recording and had every right to be there. Furthermore, the conversation was taking place outdoors, where there was no reasonable expectation of privacy. The judge agreed, denying the request to suppress the recording as evidence. What followed was something I'll never forget. Judge Reynolds temporarily halted the divorce proceedings and issued an emergency order freezing all of the couple's assets, including the secret accounts we'd uncovered. She also ordered a full investigation into the fraud allegations and referred the case to the district attorney for possible criminal prosecution. Jessica and Karen walked out of court that day not as the triumphant victors they'd hoped to be, but as potential criminals under investigation. As I left the courthouse, Jessica confronted me in the hallway. For the first time since I'd met her, I saw her true face, not the carefully constructed mask of a loving wife, but the cold, calculating expression of the person who had plotted my downfall. "You'll regret this," she hissed. "No one will want to do business with you after I finish telling my side of the story." Andrew gently pulled me away, reminding me that any conversation could be used against me later. The following weeks were a whirlwind of depositions, financial audits, and meetings with prosecutors. The criminal investigation expanded to include potential violations of industrial espionage and national security laws, given CyberShield's work with government clients. Investigators discovered that Jessica had attempted to sell proprietary information to 2 direct competitors, though she apparently failed to complete any transactions before being discovered. Jessica tried to contact me several times, alternating between veiled threats and desperate pleas. In one particularly disturbing voicemail, she tearfully said she had initially loved me, but that her mother had convinced her I was just a stepping stone to a better life. In another, she offered to drop all demands if I agreed to drop the criminal charges. I didn't respond to any attempts to contact her, following Andrew's advice to maintain complete distance. Karen tried a different approach. Through an intermediary, she offered compromising information about Jessica in exchange for immunity for herself. The offer was rejected by prosecutors, who already had sufficient evidence against both of them. We later learned that this was a tactic Karen had used in previous situations, turning on accomplices when she realized there was no other way out. In late April, the district attorney filed formal charges against Jessica and Karen for financial fraud, embezzlement, and attempted industrial espionage. The case had become a minor local scandal, with some newspapers covering the story of the divorce-turned-criminal case. Former friends and acquaintances began contacting me, many revealing that Jessica had tried to obtain information about my business or finances through them over the years. The extent of the betrayal seemed endless. A particularly painful revelation came from my former executive assistant, Rachel, who confessed that Jessica had attempted to bribe her to gain access to confidential company documents. Rachel refused and almost reported the incident at the time, but Jessica convinced her that she was simply trying to surprise me with a work-related gift. Other employees reported similar experiences, creating a clear pattern of systematic attempts to infiltrate the company. Amidst all the legal chaos, something unexpected happened. I began to reconnect with parts of myself I had neglected during the marriage. I resumed rock climbing, a hobby Jessica had always discouraged as dangerous and classless. I reconnected with old friends who had been gradually removed from my social circle, now realizing this had been a deliberate tactic to isolate me and make me more emotionally dependent on Jessica. I began working with a therapist specializing in relationship trauma, who helped me understand how I had been the victim of a sophisticated form of emotional and financial abuse. With the support of David and other friends who stuck by my side, I gradually regained not only my physical health but also my confidence. My panic attacks became less frequent, and I began sleeping better. I focused on projects at CyberShield that I had put off due to the stress of the divorce, including a new product line to protect small businesses against cyber threats, something I had always wanted to develop but which Jessica had dismissed as not profitable enough. In June 2023, 3 months after the revealing hearing, we reached a settlement in the divorce proceedings. With all the evidence against her, Jessica was in no position to make demands. The final agreement included equitable division of only assets legitimately acquired during the marriage, excluding those purchased with embezzled funds, full return of all illegally embezzled funds, my full retention of ownership and control of CyberShield, return of the antique car collection and vacation home, and a clause barring Jessica or Karen from any contact with me or my company in the future. The issue of the houses was more complicated. Technically, both were in Jessica's name, but we were able to prove that I had provided all the financing and that the ownership transfer had been part of a fraudulent scheme. The court ordered Jessica to transfer ownership of the Lake Tahoe house back to me in full. As for the main house, where we had lived together, we decided to sell it and split the proceeds, mainly because I no longer wanted to live in a place with so many painful memories. On the criminal side, both women agreed to a deal with the prosecutor. Jessica pleaded guilty to lesser charges of financial fraud, receiving 3 years probation, 1,000 hours of community service, and a substantial fine. Karen, who had a similar background, was not so fortunate. She received an 18-month prison sentence, suspended due to her age and health conditions, resulting in 2 years house arrest and financial reparations. The judge in the criminal case was particularly harsh in his comments, describing their actions as a betrayal not only of the law, but of basic principles of trust and human decency. Ironically, it was through this painful process that I met Emma Miller, a forensic financial analyst working with Andrew's team investigating the case. Emma, 37, had specialized in financial fraud cases after falling victim to a fraudulent investment scheme years earlier. Unlike Jessica, Emma was genuinely passionate about her career and impressively ethical. We began as professional acquaintances, evolved into a cautious friendship, and only after the case was closed did we allow ourselves to explore the mutual attraction we'd felt from the beginning. Our first official meeting was in September 2023, 6 months after that life-changing hearing. The process of opening up to a new relationship was terrifying. Every time Emma asked a question about my business or finances, an alarm bell rang in my head, a remnant of Jessica's betrayal. I was completely transparent with Emma about these insecurities, and she responded with remarkable patience and understanding. Rather than taking offense at my initial caution, she respected it, always offering me the same transparency she expected of me. When I mentioned my concerns to my therapist, he helped me distinguish between healthy caution and paralyzing paranoia, reminding me that I couldn't allow Jessica to steal my future, too. Emma taught me that it's possible to trust again, but in a different way, not with blind abandon, but with open eyes and mutual respect. With her, I learned to value transparency in a relationship without sacrificing the vulnerability that makes human connections meaningful. Each small step of rebuilt trust was a victory over the trauma Jessica and Karen had inflicted. CyberShield not only survived the turmoil, but thrived. Media coverage of the case, while initially troubling, ultimately generated positive interest in the company as a victim who had resisted a sophisticated industrial espionage attempt. New clients, particularly those concerned about internal security and protection against insider threats, began to reach out to us. My personal experience with fraud inspired me to develop a new division within the company focused specifically on financial fraud and identity theft protection for individuals. The service, which we launched in January 2024, quickly became our fastest-growing offering. There was something deeply healing about transforming my pain into something that could protect others from suffering similar losses. On the one-year anniversary of the hearing that changed everything, I gathered the CyberShield team for an important announcement. I had decided to make stock options available to all employees, allowing them to share more directly in the company's success. I also announced the creation of a nonprofit foundation to educate potential victims about financial fraud and economic abuse in relationships. The foundation, which I named Clear Shield, in a nod to both transparency and protection, offered educational resources and, in some cases, legal assistance to people in vulnerable situations. As for Jessica and Karen, I heard from third parties that they moved to another state after the scandal. The confidentiality agreement we signed as part of the final settlement prevents me from discussing specific details of the case publicly, but the lessons I learned are mine to share. And that's why I'm telling this story today. What I realized, looking back, is that all the signs were there. Jessica's reluctance to have children wasn't about career or timing, but about avoiding a permanent bond that would complicate her exit plan. Karen's sudden interest in my business wasn't familial enthusiasm, but predatory recognition of an opportunity. Jessica's insistence that assets be placed solely in her name wasn't about protection, but preparation. I ignored these signs because I chose to see what I wanted to see, a loving partner and a family that finally accepted me. Perhaps the most painful part wasn't the financial betrayal, but the emotional one. When I heard Jessica say on that recording that she never wanted children with me, something broke inside me that not even subsequent legal victories could fully repair. For years, I'd cherished the dream of becoming a father, postponing it at her request, believing we were building a solid foundation first. Discovering that this future was never truly on the table was like losing not only the past I thought I'd lived, but also the future I'd imagined. The impact of this revelation was profound. For months after the divorce, I avoided any thought of starting a family, convinced that this part of my life was permanently compromised. It was Emma who gently helped me separate the dream from the trauma. In a particularly meaningful conversation a few months after we started dating, she shared her own desire to have children one day, not as a pressure or expectation, but as a possibility that could be explored when we were both ready. It was the first time since the divorce that I allowed myself to consider that possibility again. The healing journey was non-linear, with ups and downs. There were days when I felt completely free of the past, and others when an unexpected trigger, an old email accidentally found, a photo on social media, or even the scent of a perfume Jessica used to wear, would throw me back to that moment of devastating discovery. My therapist taught me to recognize these moments as a natural part of the healing process, not as failures or weaknesses. Today, I'm rebuilding that future on new terms. Emma and I are discussing the possibility of moving in together, a step we're approaching with careful consideration and complete financial transparency, a lesson I'll never forget. CyberShield is planning an international expansion, with new offices planned for London and Singapore in the coming years. I'm learning to play the piano, something I've always wanted to do but never found the time. My vintage car collection now includes the 1967 Mustang I've always dreamed of restoring, a project that has become a therapeutic form of active meditation. Most importantly, I'm sleeping again, without nightmares, without waking up in a panic at 3 a.m. Recently, I did something I never imagined I'd do again. I started house hunting. Not for investment or status, but to create a true home. Emma and I visited dozens of properties, evaluating them not for their potential resale value or impression on others, but simply for the criterion of whether we could imagine ourselves building a happy life there. The house we finally chose is smaller and less ostentatious than the mansion I shared with Jessica, but every corner of it was selected by us, together, with a shared vision. In the purchase negotiations, I insisted on clear legal structures that protect both of our interests. Not out of distrust of Emma, but out of respect for her right to security and independence, as well as my own. This approach, which once would have seemed cold or calculating, I now understand to be the foundation of a truly equitable and healthy relationship. Trust is not the absence of protective structures, but the conscious creation of a space where both can be vulnerable, knowing that mutual safeguards exist. If there's one lesson I've learned that I'd like to share, it's this: trust, but verify. Love doesn't require willful blindness. True partners aren't afraid of transparency. And if something seems too good to be true, you might need to take a closer look, not out of cynicism, but out of self-preservation. I've learned the hard way that some people see relationships not as partnerships, but as opportunities for exploitation. Identifying these early can save not only your finances, but also your mental health and precious years of your life. What I discovered through this experience is that there are different kinds of strength. There's the strength that comes from shielding yourself from vulnerability, which is what I initially tried to do after the divorce. And there's the deeper strength that comes from remaining open to genuine connection even after betrayal, from taking risks again with your eyes open. This second form is infinitely more difficult, but also infinitely more rewarding. In my last therapy session, my therapist asked me if I could find any positive aspects of the traumatic experience. After reflection, I responded that I learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. With Jessica, I was deeply lonely without realizing it, living with someone who saw me only as a useful resource, not as a person. Today, even in the moments when I'm physically alone, I feel connected, to myself, to people who truly care about me, to a future that is genuinely mine. The divorce Jessica and Karen planned as my downfall became, ironically, my liberation. Not just from their schemes, but from the illusions I had created about what constituted love and partnership. In the end, it wasn't them who lost everything, as they planned for me to lose, it was I who lost the chains I didn't even know I was carrying. I won't say I've forgiven Jessica or Karen, that's a work in progress. But I no longer allow my anger toward them to define my days or direct my decisions. They've already stolen 8 years of my life, they don't deserve another minute of my future. Instead, I focus on the new possibilities, the lessons learned, and the stronger, wiser person I've become through this cleansing fire. Sometimes, when I'm driving one of my old cars on Washington's coastal roads, with the wind tousling my hair and no specific destination in mind, I feel an unexpected gratitude. Not for what I've endured, but for what I've discovered, my own resilience, the importance of true friends like David, the existence of honest professionals like Andrew, and the possibility of authentic connections like the one I'm building with Emma. In those moments, I know I survived not just divorce, but a concerted attempt to break my spirit and emerge stronger. Recently, I had an eye-opening experience. I was sorting through some old documents and found the card Jessica gave me for our first wedding anniversary. In it, she had written, "To the man who made all my dreams come true." At the time, I interpreted these words as an expression of love and gratitude. Now, I see them for what they truly were, a literal declaration of her intentions. I was truly making her dreams come true, dreams of wealth, status, and material gain. But there was no genuine reciprocity, only her carefully constructed illusion. What struck me most wasn't the falseness of the message, but my own reaction upon rereading it. Instead of the sharp pain I would have felt months earlier, I experienced only a gentle, distant melancholy, as if I were reading about someone else's life. That's when I realized I was truly moving forward, not just surviving, but rebuilding. My story isn't just about a divorce gone wrong for the conspirators. It's about recognizing that sometimes we have to lose everything we thought we wanted to find what we truly need. It's about learning that wounds, no matter how deep, eventually heal, leaving us wiser and capable of more authentic joy than we ever imagined possible during the dark days. I have to admit, a small part of me smiled when I learned that the Malibu mansion Karen had been desperately hoping I'd buy, presumably so it could eventually become part of the loot, had recently been acquired by a former Cyber Shield competitor who had become a business partner. Life has a peculiar sense of humor sometimes. In October 2024, more than a year and a half after that fateful day in court, I received an envelope in the mail with no return address. Inside was just a newspaper clipping, a short article about Karen being arrested again, this time for attempting a similar scheme with a wealthy widower in her new city. There was no note, no explanation. I never discovered who sent it, but I suspect it may have been Jessica's lawyer, who seemed genuinely horrified when the evidence of her schemes came to light. I felt no pleasure at the news, only a sad confirmation that some people rarely change. As for Jessica, I learned through mutual connections that she's working as a saleswoman in a department store, struggling to rebuild her life with her reputation tarnished and the doors closed to the corporate world due to her crimes. Part of me, a small but persistent part, hopes she'll eventually find a better path, not for my sake, but for her own. Living with such calculation and coldness feels like a form of imprisonment. In late 2024, Emma and I attended a benefit gala for the Clear Shield Foundation. The event raised over $750,000 to support victims of financial abuse and relationship fraud. During my speech, I shared parts of my story, omitting details that would violate the confidentiality agreement, but highlighting the warning signs and protective mechanisms everyone should be aware of. After the event, I was approached by dozens of people who shared similar experiences, some men, many women, all united by the common trauma of having trusted someone who saw them only as an opportunity to exploit them. A woman in her 70s squeezed my hand tightly and said, "My husband of 40 years did something similar. I thought I was alone, that I was the only fool who didn't see the signs." Her words reminded me that although my experience was painful, there was a purpose in sharing it, to break the silence and shame that often surrounds these types of abuse, regardless of the victim's gender or status. This year, for the first time since my divorce, I celebrated my birthday with a party. Nothing extravagant, just a gathering of people who truly care about me at the beach house I almost lost. Emma organized everything, inviting friends old and new. As I watched everyone chatting and laughing on the deck where, not long ago, Jessica and Karen toasted my downfall, I felt a circle closing. That space had been reclaimed, as had my life. Emma and I recently talked about our future. At 38, I'm thinking about parenthood again, not as an abstract dream or social expectation, but as a real and desired possibility. Emma, at 37, shares this desire. There's something deeply healing about imagining a family based on authentic values of care and mutual respect. I don't know exactly how or when this dream will come true, perhaps adoption, perhaps biological conception, but simply being able to consider these possibilities without the burden of the past is a significant victory. At CyberShield, we recently implemented a program called Shield Forward, designed to help other companies protect themselves against insider threats, disgruntled employees, dishonest business partners, or spouses with access to sensitive information. The program was developed directly from my personal experience and is already helping dozens of organizations identify vulnerabilities before they can be exploited. Turning my trauma into something that protects others has been one of the most rewarding experiences of my professional life. In quiet moments, when I reflect on everything that happened, I still occasionally wonder how I didn't see it coming. The answer, I believe, lies in the social expectations we've internalized about love and marriage. We're conditioned to view absolute trust as a requirement, to interpret caution as cynicism, to equate self-protection with a lack of commitment. These cultural narratives made me vulnerable, as they make many others vulnerable every day. If you're experiencing something similar, betrayal, manipulation, emotional or financial abuse, I want you to know a few things. First, you're not alone, even if you feel completely isolated. Second, what's happening to you isn't your fault. Manipulative people are experts at making you doubt your own perception and blame yourself for your problems. Third, and most importantly, there is a way out, to reclaim not only your material possessions, but your sense of self-worth and hope. It may seem impossible now, but I promise it isn't. I've learned that life rarely follows the scripts we imagine. The marriage I thought was my safe haven was actually an elaborate trap. The tragedy I thought would end my ability to trust and love became the catalyst for a relationship more authentic than any I've ever experienced. The trauma that seemed destined to destroy me ended up strengthening me in ways I never imagined possible. When I think about the future now, it's no longer with fear or resentment, but with cautiously optimistic curiosity. I don't know exactly what will come next, if Emma and I will build a life together, if I will finally become a father, if CyberShield will continue its upward trajectory. What I do know is that I will face these challenges and possibilities as a stronger, more authentic version of myself, someone who has been through the worst and discovered that I could not only survive, but thrive. A few days ago, I stumbled upon an old photo of Jessica and me, taken during our honeymoon in the Maldives. I stared at those smiling faces for a long time, trying to discern if there was any sign, even then, of what was to come. I couldn't see any. Maybe there were no signs to see, or maybe love really is blind sometimes. Either way, I kept the photo, not out of nostalgia or masochism, but as a reminder that even the most painful chapters of our lives eventually become just that, chapters, not the whole story. This is my story. It's not just a story about betrayal and loss, but about rediscovery and rebirth. It's a story that continues to unfold, with new characters and possibilities appearing around every corner. It's a story that, despite its dark parts, I'm grateful to be able to continue writing. It's a story about how sometimes we have to lose everything we thought we had to find what truly matters. In one of the first serious conversations I had with Emma, she told me something that continues to resonate with me: trusting after betrayal isn't naive, it's an act of courage. These words gave me permission to risk myself again, to believe that there are people in the world who deserve our vulnerability and who will respect the trust placed in them. I discovered that true intimacy doesn't come from the blind merging of identities or finances, but from the meeting of two people who choose to connect while maintaining healthy boundaries and mutual respect. Looking back now, I see my marriage to Jessica not as 12 wasted years, but as a necessary chapter that brought me exactly where I need to be. Without that experience, I might never have learned the lessons that now guide my life. I might never have met Emma, or founded Clear Shield, or developed the products that now help others protect themselves. I might never have discovered the depth of my own resilience or the importance of genuine friendships like the one I have with David. There's no perfect roadmap for recovering from a betrayal of this magnitude. The path is non-linear, with good days and bad, progress and setbacks. What I've learned is the importance of being patient with yourself throughout the process, celebrating small victories, and recognizing that healing comes in its own time. Most importantly, I've learned that we can transform even our most painful experiences into sources of wisdom and purpose. If you've listened this far, you probably recognize that relationships and families aren't always what we imagine, right? Here on this channel, you'll find a safe space where real stories like mine are told without judgment. These stories will move you, make you reflect, and perhaps even help you better understand your own family and romantic experiences. If you identified with any aspect of my story, or know someone who might be going through a similar situation, please share this video. Like it, subscribe to the channel, and share your own experiences or reflections in the comments. Together, we form a community where every story matters and where no one has to face their challenges alone. Thank you for listening, and we'll see you in the next story.